The night it happened still burns in my mind, the kind of cold that bites through your bones and into your soul. We were on our way to his ex's birthday party. Yes, you heard that right, his ex. 8 months pregnant, swollen ankles, but smiling anyway, because that's what a good wife does. I even wrapped the damn gift myself, something tasteful and expensive just to show I wasn't threatened. The highway was quiet, blanketed in snow. The temperature read -12 Celsius, that's about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, but it felt colder than that inside the car. The silence between us was thicker than the fog on the windshield. He barely looked at me. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I thought he was nervous, maybe guilty, maybe trying to figure out how to act normal around his ex. I tried to fill the silence with small talk, asked about the guest list, the gift, if we'd stay long. Nothing. Just the hum of the engine and the sound of my breath fogging the glass. Then somewhere between exit 42 and the frozen fields beyond, he pulled over. At first I thought he needed to check something, the tires, the lights, who knows. But he didn't open the hood. He just sat there staring straight ahead, engine idling. My hand went to my belly, a reflex now. The baby kicked. Then he said it 4 words that still echo inside me. You'll be fine here. Before I could speak, before I could even process what the hell that meant, he opened the door, stepped out, and walked around the car. I felt my pulse jump, my breath caught in my throat. I thought maybe he was joking, maybe some twisted test of loyalty or patience. But he opened my door. The cold air hit me like a slap. "Michael," I said, my voice shaking. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. Didn't look at me. He just reached inside, took the car keys, and placed them on the roof. His face was empty. I remember the way the snowflakes caught in his hair, the way his breath fogged the air between us, 2 ghosts in the middle of nowhere. I reached for his sleeve. "Please don't do this." He pulled back. "You'll be fine," he repeated. Then he shut the door. And just like that, he was gone. The taillights disappeared into the snow. No words, no explanation, nothing. Just the echo of the tires grinding against the ice. I stood there, 8 months pregnant, wearing a thin coat, my boots sinking into the snow. The wind howled through the empty fields. My breath came in clouds. My hands shook so hard I dropped my phone. It cracked when it hit the ground. No signal anyway. I screamed his name once, twice. The sound vanished into the storm. For a few minutes I just stood there trying to understand what had happened. Then the cold started to hurt. The kind of pain that feels sharp at first, then dull, then numb. I started walking. I don't even know which direction. The road looked the same both ways. The snow came harder sideways. My coat wasn't enough. My baby kicked again, weak and slow. I kept one hand on my belly and the other stretched out in front of me, searching for headlights for anything. I saw one in the distance, a glow that could have been salvation or a hallucination. I waved, screamed, but it passed right by. Maybe they thought I was crazy. Maybe I looked like a ghost. Minutes blurred into hours. My legs were stiff, my lips numb, and I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. I remember falling once, face first, into the snow. The world went silent, muffled. My breath sounded far away. I thought, so this is how it ends. But then a sound, tires, headlights, a horn. Someone stopped. A man's voice shouted. I couldn't make out the words. Hands lifted me up, wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like diesel and smoke. A trucker, I think. He kept saying, "Jesus, lady, what the hell are you doing out here?" I tried to answer, but my lips wouldn't move. I just pointed to my stomach. He cursed under his breath and rushed me into the cab, turned the heat all the way up, radio blaring static. My vision tunneled. I remember the sound of him calling 911. Then nothing. When I woke up, everything was white. The ceiling, the sheets, the light. For a second, I thought I was dead. Then I heard a cry. A baby's cry. I turned my head slowly. There was a nurse standing by an incubator. She smiled at me gently, the kind of smile that tries not to hurt you more. "Your baby's okay," she said softly. "You both made it." Both. That word broke me. Because part of me hadn't made it. The woman I was, the naive, trusting wife, died on that road. What survived was something else, something colder. They told me he never came to the hospital. No calls, no visits, nothing. The police filed a report, but said there wasn't enough to charge him with anything. No crime committed. Just a man who left his wife during an argument. That was the phrase they used during an argument. But I knew better. It wasn't an argument. It was an execution, quiet, calculated final. I stared out the window for hours that night, watching the snow fall outside the hospital. The same kind of snow that had almost buried me. I promised myself something. If fate was cruel enough to keep me alive, then I'd make sure he never forgot that night. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But someday he would look at me and realize the storm he left behind had come back for him. The first thing I remember after waking up was the sound of machines, a steady beeping, the hum of air vents, a soft crying that wasn't mine. It took me a moment to realize I was in a hospital. My throat was dry, my hands were wrapped in gauze, and when I tried to move, pain spread through every muscle like fire under my skin. A nurse appeared, middle-aged, calm, tired but kind. She said, "Don't move too much, honey. You're safe now." Safe. I wasn't sure I remembered what that word meant. Then I asked the only question that mattered. My baby. She smiled the kind of smile that holds both good and bad news. She's small, but she's a fighter. Born early, but she's breathing on her own. You can see her soon. She, a girl. Tears came before I could stop them. They rolled down the sides of my face into my hair. I hadn't realized I was crying until the nurse wiped them away with a tissue. She told me I'd been found by a trucker who saw me collapse on the side of the road. She said I'd been half frozen, barely conscious, and the baby was delivered within the hour. You were lucky, she said. Very lucky. Lucky. That word stung worse than the IV needle in my arm. When the nurse left, I turned my head toward the window. It was morning, gray light snow still falling. The world outside looked calm, clean, peaceful. Inside me, everything was chaos. I kept thinking he'd walk through the door. Michael. Maybe he'd realize what he'd done. Maybe he'd call or show up with flowers and guilt written all over his face. But the door stayed closed. The phone stayed silent. The nurse came back later with paperwork and asked if I wanted to list an emergency contact. I laughed. It sounded harsh in that quiet room. No one, I said, just me. She nodded, wrote something on her clipboard, and left again. For the next few days, I stayed mostly silent. The social worker came by, gentle but firm, asking questions about what happened. I told her the truth, that he'd left me on the road. She frowned, took notes, and said the police would come talk to me. They did. 2 officers, one older, one young. The older one kept looking at me like he didn't quite believe it. The younger one wrote things down, but never met my eyes. So, ma'am, the older one said, you're saying your husband just stopped the car and left. Yes? No argument, no fight. I shook my head. He said, you'll be fine here. Then he drove away. The older officer sighed. Legally, that's not abandonment, not in the criminal sense. My voice cracked. He left me in -12 degrees. He nodded slow like he'd heard it all before. I'm sorry, ma'am, but unless he intended to cause harm, he did cause harm. The younger officer finally looked up, guilt in his eyes. We'll file a report, he said softly, but don't expect much. And that was that. No justice, no charges, no closure. I remember lying awake that night, listening to the snow hit the window. My daughter was in the NICU, fighting to breathe, and the man who did this was probably sleeping warm in his bed. Something inside me shifted that night, something permanent. I realized no one was coming to save me. Not the police, not family, not him. The world didn't care. So I decided I would. The following weeks were a blur of exhaustion. Physical pain, sleepless nights forms to fill social workers asking about finances. I had no money, he'd frozen our joint accounts. The bank clerk's words still ring in my ears. I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins, but your husband removed you as an authorized user. Removed me, like deleting a line from a spreadsheet. I sold my wedding ring for enough cash to cover 2 weeks at a cheap motel. The manager there was kind of a widow who understood. She let me stay, even after I fell behind on rent for a few days. I got a part-time job answering phones at a dry cleaning service. Minimum wage, long hours, but it kept food on the table and heat in the room. I slept with my daughter tucked against my chest, the hum of the heater, our lullaby. Her name was Emily. Tiny hands, strong lungs, a face that looked like mine, but eyes that reminded me of him, cold, gray, distant. Some nights I stared at her and whispered, "You're never going to be like him." When Emily was 6 months old, I went back to school. Online classes, at first accounting, business, law, Excel. Numbers made sense when people didn't. Numbers didn't lie, didn't cheat, didn't leave. I learned fast. I found comfort in logic, in spreadsheets, in systems that had rules and consequences. By the time Emily turned 3, I had an associate's degree and an internship at a small finance firm downtown. My boss, Laura, was in her 50s, sharp, composed, a woman who'd clearly lived through her own storms. She saw through my silence immediately. One night after everyone else had gone home, she said, "You've got that look, the one people get when they've been through hell and decided to come back smarter." I didn't respond, but she smiled anyway. "Good. Keep it. It'll take you far." Laura became my mentor. She taught me how the world really worked, not the version in books, but the one where people hide money, forge signatures, destroy lives with contracts instead of guns. And I learned, by the time I was 34, I was no longer the woman who'd begged on the side of a frozen road. I was the woman who could read a company's soul through its balance sheet. Still at night, when the apartment went quiet and Emily was asleep, I sometimes saw those taillights again. The red fading into white snow, the sound of his voice saying, "You'll be fine here." And every time I did, I whispered back, "I will be." But you won't. By the time Emily turned 4, she could read simple words, count to 100, and tell when her mother was pretending to be fine. Kids sense things like that. They always do. I used to smile for her, even when I came home too tired to stand. I'd sit on the couch, her tiny hands cupping my face, and she'd whisper, "Mommy, are we safe now?" Yes, I'd lie, we're safe. The truth was more complicated. Safety wasn't a place, it was a disguise. Every month I changed something: phone number, address, email, just in case he ever came looking. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was logic. Either way, it kept me breathing. But fear alone wasn't enough to build a life. I needed something stronger, something that made sense. That's when I found Laura again. She'd left the small firm we worked at and started her own consultancy, small, selective, all women, all sharp. One day, I got a message from her. "Come work with me. You've got the instincts. Let me sharpen them." So I did. Her office wasn't glamorous, just a modest building with frosted glass doors and old wooden floors that creaked when you walked. But it smelled like coffee and confidence, the kind of place where decisions got made. Laura taught me how to read people the way I'd learned to read numbers. She said money doesn't lie, but people do. Watch their hands, not their mouths. She was in her late 50s, a widow who never spoke about her husband. I didn't ask, but sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd touch her wedding band still on her finger, polished like new. She was everything I wanted to become: calm, respected, untouchable. One afternoon, we met with a new client, a middle-aged woman going through a messy divorce from a real estate developer. The husband had hidden assets, fake shell companies, offshore accounts. As I sat across from her taking notes, I realized something that hit me like ice water. I could be her. If I hadn't walked away, if I hadn't survived that night, that could have been me sitting there broken, begging for help. After the meeting, Laura said quietly, "You did well. You didn't flinch." I saw myself in her, I admitted. She nodded. "Good. That's how you know you're still human. But remember, empathy is a tool. Use it, don't drown in it." That night I stayed late at the office. Emily was with our neighbor, a sweet retired teacher who treated her like family. I sat at my desk, staring at spreadsheets tracing financial trails that led to lies. Somewhere in those numbers, I felt alive again. There was a pattern to deceit, a rhythm, a language. And once you learned it, you could turn it back on anyone, including him. One Friday evening, Laura poured us both a glass of wine after closing a big case. She asked, "You ever think about going after the one who hurt you?" I hesitated. "I think about it every day." She smiled, not cruelly, but knowingly. "Good. That's your edge. Don't waste it on anger. Turn it into precision." That night I lay awake replaying her words. Precision. I didn't want revenge just to make him hurt. I wanted to dismantle him piece by piece the way he'd dismantled me. So I started small. I searched his name online. The results made my stomach twist. Michael Collins, CEO of Collins Industrial Group, a tech manufacturing company, headquarters downtown. Photos of him smiling beside his new wife, her, the ex, the same woman whose birthday we'd been driving to that night. They looked perfect. The house, the suits, the charity galas, every picture was a lie. But beneath the surface, I saw things other people wouldn't. Numbers that didn't add up, deals that moved too fast, subsidiaries in states with soft tax laws. I knew that kind of pattern. I'd seen it 100 times at work, and I knew how to follow it. For the next year, I built my life around 2 missions: raise Emily and prepare. I volunteered for audits, corporate investigations, anything that would give me access to big company structures. I learned how CEOs move money, how boards cover it up, how they hide things in plain sight. By the time I turned 35, I had a new name, Claire Monroe. Not Collins. Never again Collins. My resume was clean, impressive, and vague enough to pass background checks. I'd earned Laura's trust completely. She brought me into high-value projects, often confidential ones. And then one morning, she said something that made my heart stop. "We've been approached by Collins Industrial," she said, flipping through her files. "They're asking for internal audit support before an acquisition." I tried to keep my face still. "Who's leading it?" "You," she said simply. "You're the best at this kind of job." She didn't know. She couldn't have known. Inside, my pulse raced. On the outside, I smiled. Of course. That night, after Emily fell asleep, I sat by her bed and whispered, "It's time." She didn't understand, of course, but I needed to say it out loud. The snow had started falling again outside. It looked like the same kind of night, quiet, cold, and endless. I stood by the window, watching the flakes drift under the streetlight. 5 years ago, I'd begged in that snow. Now I was walking back into it on my terms. I pulled out a small wooden box from the closet. Inside were things I'd kept all these years, the cracked phone from. That night, the hospital bracelet, a photo of me holding Emily for the first time. And the car key, the one he'd left on the roof. I held it in my hand, metal cold against my skin, and smiled for the first time in years. People think revenge is rage. It's not. It's patience, wearing high heels, and a perfect smile. I was ready to walk into his empire like I belonged there. And the best part was, I did. The first day I walked into Collins Industrial, I felt the air change. Corporate buildings all smell the same coffee cologne toner and ambition. But this one had something else under it, something stale, like old secrets trapped behind glass. I wore a navy suit, hair tied back heels, quiet against the marble floor. I looked like everyone else, busy, polished, harmless. My badge read, Claire Monroe, Internal Audit Consultant. No one blinked twice. That was the beauty of it. I was invisible. The company had grown into a mid-sized empire, robotics manufacturing, smart sensors, military contracts. Michael's name was everywhere. Visionary CEO, self-made success, a leader who builds the future. He even had his own quote on the lobby wall: "Integrity is the foundation of innovation." I almost laughed out loud. 5 years ago, he left me to die in the snow. Now he was lecturing the world about integrity. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to walk like I belonged. Because I did belong. I'd earned this. My department was small, 6 people, all detail-obsessed and politically cautious. They didn't like outsiders, but Laura's firm had credibility. We'd been brought in to prepare the company for acquisition. That meant access to everything: payroll ledgers, subsidiaries, vendor records. I smiled through introductions, shook hands, and took notes. When I met the head of finance, a balding man with a habit of blinking too much, he said, "Laura speaks highly of you. You're sharp with numbers." "I try to be," I said. He chuckled. "You'll need it here. This company has history." I tilted my head. History. He hesitated. "Let's just say our CEO likes to move fast, sometimes faster than accounting can keep up." That was all I needed to hear. For weeks I lived inside spreadsheets and transaction logs. I didn't sleep much. Emily stayed with my neighbor most evenings. Every number I saw was another thread, another piece of the web. And then I found it a set of payments routed through a shell supplier, Arcturus Logistics. On paper, it handled overseas transport. In reality, it didn't exist. The invoices were fake, the signatures forged. The trail led straight to the executive suite. I checked the authorization codes. Every payment required approval from one person, the CEO. Michael. The first time I saw him again was at a staff briefing 2 weeks later. He looked older, harder, but still carried himself like the world owed him attention. Perfect tie, perfect smile, a faint streak of gray in his hair, the kind that made powerful men look distinguished. He walked past me, greeting department heads by name, shaking hands, flashing that politician's grin. Then his eyes brushed over mine, just for a second. Nothing, no recognition. Of course not. To him I was dead. I watched him from the back of the room while he talked about growth, innovation, and transparency. I counted every time he said the word trust. 7 times. When the meeting ended, I stayed seated until everyone else had left. I needed a moment to breathe. Seeing him again didn't bring rage, it brought clarity. He'd built everything, his company, his image, his life, on the same lie that started that night. And I was standing inside it now, one document away from pulling it all down. I sent Laura the files that night. She called immediately. "Are you sure about this?" I cross-checked every number I said. "It's clean fraud." She was silent for a moment. Then Claire. "If this leaks, it'll be a scandal. He'll be ruined." "I know." "Then why do you sound calm?" "Because it's not revenge," I said softly. "It's accounting." Laura exhaled. "You've changed." I had to. A week later, I was invited to present a report to the internal board. It was a big deal, the kind of meeting that could define a career, or destroy one. Before the meeting, I stopped by the restroom. My reflection stared back, calm, cold, measured. I straightened my blazer, touched up my lipstick, and whispered, "He doesn't know who you are. Keep it that way." Inside the boardroom, 12 men and 1 woman sat around a polished oak table. Michael entered last, smiling, like a man who knew the ending before it began. "Ms. Monroe," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to Collins Industrial. I've heard great things." His voice. God, I'd forgotten how smooth it was, like silk hiding glass. "Thank you, Mr. Collins," I said, shaking his hand. My palm didn't tremble. He didn't recognize me. Not the voice, not the eyes, nothing. I clicked the remote and began the presentation. Graphs, charts, clean language, professional, emotionless. But each slide carried a hidden knife. When I showed the flow of funds, his posture shifted. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Where did you find these?" "They were in your Q3 financials," I said evenly. "I thought you'd want to be aware before the acquisition audit." He smiled, small, careful. Of course. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He knew someone was getting close. But not who. After the meeting, I packed up my laptop. He lingered. "You're thorough," he said. "We need more people like you." I forced a polite smile. "That's what I'm here for." As I turned to leave, he said, "You remind me of someone." I froze for half a heartbeat, then looked over my shoulder. I get that a lot. And walked away. That night, Laura called again. "You played it perfectly," she said. "He's nervous." "Good," I said. "He should be." "Do you want to stop here? We can report it to the auditors and step back." I stared out my apartment window, the city lights reflected in the glass. Emily was asleep in the next room, clutching her stuffed bear. "No," I said quietly. "Not yet. Not until he knows." Laura sighed. "Knows what?" "That it's me." For the next month, I stayed one step ahead of him. Every fake account he tried to bury, I uncovered. Every transaction he thought hidden, I traced. He was good, but I was better. One night, while going through encrypted email chains, I found something that made my blood run cold. A message between him and the company's vice president. Subject: birthday party date. The same week he left me. She'd been the one throwing that party, the ex. Now she was his VP, his new wife, and his accomplice. The trail wasn't just money anymore. It was corruption at the top, both of them tied to the fraud. I closed the laptop, heart pounding. It wasn't just about revenge now, it was about justice. And justice, I'd learned, was best served with numbers, timing, and silence. I always thought the first time I'd see her again, I'd feel rage. But when it finally happened, I felt nothing. Just a stillness, the kind that comes before an earthquake. Her name was Vanessa Blake now. She'd dropped her maiden name and married into Michael's, vice president of operations. Elegant, poised, and dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine ad for power and grace. The kind of woman everyone called a survivor except the ones who knew better. She walked into the Monday executive meeting 10 minutes late, wearing a cream blazer, smiling like the world bent for her. The room hushed not out of respect, but calculation. Everyone knew she was the power behind the CEO. Michael introduced us. Vanessa, this is Claire Monroe, our consultant from Parker & Reeves. She's heading the internal audit prep. Vanessa extended her hand. Nice to meet you, Claire. I've heard wonderful things. Her voice hadn't changed, smooth-cultured, full of practiced empathy. I took her hand, meeting her eyes. Likewise, I said, smiling just enough. Her grip was firm, too firm. It was a handshake between predators pretending to be polite. Over the next few weeks, I watched her move through the building like a ghost with perfect posture. Everyone adored her. She remembered birthdays, sent thank you notes, complimented interns. A living PR campaign. But I saw what others missed. The coded glances she exchanged with Michael during meetings. The quiet approvals on unlogged expenses. The way certain documents vanished from shared drives after she accessed them. She wasn't just complicit, she was orchestrating. Laura once told me revenge isn't about emotion. It's about observation. People hang themselves when you give them enough rope. So I gave them rope. I started sharing carefully curated reports, ones that revealed small discrepancies but not the full picture. Every time Michael or Vanessa would rush to correct them before anyone else saw, which meant they'd reveal more by accident. Within 3 weeks, I had everything. Forged approvals, faked vendor lists, hidden accounts, and my favorite, a private email thread between them. In one of them, Vanessa wrote, "Don't worry, I deleted the audit copy. No one's that thorough." I almost laughed out loud when I read it. The next board meeting was scheduled for Friday. I prepared a version of my report, clean detailed and entirely traceable. But before submitting it, I made a duplicate and encrypted it with a passcode only Laura and I knew. That evening, as the office emptied out, Vanessa approached my desk. Her tone was sweet, her perfume expensive. "Claire, do you have a moment?" I closed my laptop, of course. She sat on the edge of my desk, crossing her legs just so. "I've been reviewing your drafts. You're very thorough. Maybe too thorough." I smiled. "That's what I'm paid for." Her eyes sharpened. "You know sometimes it's better not to see everything. This company's been through a lot. Loyalty matters here." "Loyalty," I repeated, tilting my head. "To who?" She hesitated, then smiled again. "You'll learn. If you play smart, there's room for you here. Michael likes women who don't make trouble." That word women landed heavy. It wasn't advice, it was a warning. I leaned forward, my voice low. "I'm sure he does." She blinked just a flicker, like something deep inside her registered that tone. She didn't know why it unsettled her, but it did. "Good night, Vanessa," I said, turning back to my screen. She lingered, then stood and walked away, heels echoing down the marble hall. The moment she was gone, I opened my email and sent the encrypted file to Laura with a single line. "It's ready." Friday came. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and tension. I sat at the far end laptop, open hands folded. Michael looked confident. Vanessa radiant. The perfect couple. Laura had joined via video call from her office downtown. She gave me a nod, subtle, steady. Michael began all charm. "Before we start, I'd like to thank our audit team. Ms. Monroe has done a phenomenal job ensuring full transparency." Applause, polite, controlled. I smiled thinly. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. Let's begin." The first few slides were predictable, clean numbers, glowing graphs. Then I flipped to the one that changed everything. "This next section concerns vendor relationships," I said, specifically Arcturus Logistics. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Vanessa's pen froze midair. I walked them through the paper trail invoices, wire transfers, signatures. Then I zoomed in on one signature. As you can see, this approval was signed by your vice president. All eyes turned to her. Michael frowned. "That's ridiculous. Vanessa would never. Actually, I said, clicking to the next slide, here's the document metadata showing her account login timestamp. 10:42 p.m., March 17th. Silence. Someone at the far end coughed. Vanessa recovered quickly. This must be a mistake. Maybe, I said calmly, but the same signature appears here and here across 6 other invoices. Michael's jaw tightened. What exactly are you implying, Ms. Monroe? That depends, I said, meeting his eyes. Do you prefer the term fraud or embezzlement? Laura's voice came through the speaker. The evidence is sufficient for external audit referral. The color drained from Vanessa's face. I closed my laptop. That concludes my presentation. I stood collecting my notes. My heart was steady, no trembling, no rush, just the deep satisfaction of balance restored. As I reached the door, Michael called out, Ms. Monroe, wait. I turned. You think this makes you a hero? He said, voice low, venomous. No, I said, it makes me right. And I left. That evening, Laura met me in her office. She poured whiskey for both of us. You realize what you've done, right? Yes, I said. I exposed them. You also put yourself on their radar. They'll come for you. Let them. She studied me. You remind me of myself 20 years ago, except colder. Good, I said. Warmth never saved me. We clinked glasses. As I drove home that night, snow began to fall again, light, soft, almost forgiving. I thought about Vanessa's face, the shock, the fear, the first cracks in her perfect smile. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, calculated, and irreversible. When I got home, Emily was asleep on the couch, a picture book open on her lap. I brushed her hair back and whispered, It's almost over, baby. I didn't know then that the next act would be louder, public, ruthless, and final. But I knew this much. They'd built a kingdom on lies. And I just pulled the first brick. The storm hit the next morning, not outside, but inside the company walls. By noon, the board had called for an emergency review. Legal teams rushed in. Auditors appeared like vultures, and every hallway conversation dropped to a whisper when I walked by. The scent of panic was everywhere. I'd seen it before in smaller companies when power starts to rot from the inside. Everyone scrambles to find someone else to blame. This time, though, it wasn't about saving a paycheck. It was about survival. Michael's empire was collapsing, and everyone knew it. Vanessa stopped coming to the office first. She took a leave of absence for health reasons. Translation, her lawyer told her to disappear. Michael tried to hold things together. He gave interviews, staged smiles, talked about internal misunderstandings. But the media caught blood in the water. The headline that Monday morning read Collins Industrial under federal investigation. Underneath it, a photo of him standing in front of the building, jaw-tight eyes, tired. He looked like a man who'd finally realized the storm wasn't passing. Laura called me that day. You ready for what comes next? I've been ready for 5 years, I said. Good, because this is when they get dangerous. She wasn't wrong. That afternoon, someone keyed my car. A week later, a brick hit my apartment window. No note, no witnesses. I filed reports, but nothing came of it. Still, I never flinched. Fear had done its time in my life. I changed my locks, upgraded security, and kept my head down at work. If anyone asked, I was just the consultant. But behind the scenes, Laura and I were feeding the audit team everything. We didn't embellish, didn't manipulate. We just showed them the truth, and the truth was devastating. Millions in misused funds, false filings, phantom vendors, and worst of all, a charity foundation meant to fund STEM scholarships that was nothing more than a money laundering channel. It wasn't just greed anymore, it was moral rot. The day the federal auditors arrived, the building felt like a courthouse. Michael greeted them personally wearing that same mask of control he'd worn all his life. But his eyes, they darted. He saw me in the lobby and gave a nod, polite, cold, curious. I returned it perfectly professional. He still didn't know. The auditors set up in conference room B. I was assigned to assist with document retrieval. In truth, they wanted my brain. I knew where everything was buried. I sat beside a man from the Department of Commerce helping him trace transfers. He leaned over at one point and whispered, "You're good at this." I smiled faintly. I've had practice. 3 days later, the story broke nationally. CNN, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. Whistleblower inside Collins Industrial uncovers decade of financial misconduct. The word whistleblower made me laugh, if only they knew. Vanessa was subpoenaed first. She looked pale in the photo's makeup, too heavy, eyes hollow. Michael followed soon after. He denied everything, of course, called it a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion. But the numbers didn't lie. The numbers never lie. That night my phone rang, private number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Claire," he said. His voice. I hadn't heard it in years, but there it was, smooth deep like an old wound reopening. Or should I say, Mrs. Collins. My heart didn't race. My breathing didn't change. I just looked out the window at the falling snow. "Wrong name," I said quietly. "That woman's gone." A pause. Then he laughed low and bitter. "You think this is revenge? You ruined everything." "No," I said. "You did. I just kept the receipts." "You think they'll believe you? You were nobody." "Exactly," I cut in. "You never notice the nobodies, Michael. That's why they always win in the end." He went silent. The sound of his breath on the line reminded me of that night, cold sharp, fading away. Then, before hanging up, he said, "You'll regret this." "I already did," I replied. 5 years ago. Click. I blocked the number. The next morning, Laura came to my apartment. She'd never done that before. She sat at my kitchen table, took off her glasses, and said, "He knows who you are now." I figured. "You should lie low." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She leaned forward. "Listen to me, men like him don't accept loss. They don't understand accountability. They think it's betrayal. Then he can add it to his list." Laura sighed. "You're not the same woman I met 10 years ago." "I hope not," I said. "She died in the snow." By March, the company was officially under federal control. The board dissolved. The stock crashed. Michael was forced to step down voluntarily. Vanessa disappeared to Europe. Rumor said she'd sold her jewelry to pay for lawyers. And me, I got promoted. Not within his company, but by the firm that replaced it. They wanted me as a senior partner for compliance restructuring. Irony, right? The woman he left in the cold, now fixing the mess he made. I accepted, of course, not out of pride, out of precision. One afternoon, I was called into the new CEO's office to review a set of legacy contracts. The blinds were open, snow falling lightly outside. And then the door opened. Michael walked in. Not as CEO, not as a guest of honor, as a man summoned for questioning. He looked smaller somehow. The suit hung loose on his frame. The gray in his hair wasn't distinguished anymore. It was defeat. When his eyes landed on me, he froze. Recognition. Real, brutal recognition. "Claire," he said, voice barely a whisper. I didn't flinch. "Mr. Collins," I said coolly. "Have a seat." He hesitated. "It's you." "Yes," I said. "It's me." His mouth opened, searching for words that didn't exist. Why, he finally asked. "Why do all this?" I tilted my head. "Because you said I'd be fine. Turns out you were right." He stared at me for a long time, then laughed hollow broken. "You destroyed me." I looked him dead in the eyes. "No, you destroyed yourself. I just did the math." He was escorted out minutes later. I watched him go, shoulders slumped, silence heavy. There was no triumph in it. No victory music, no applause. Just balance. Justice isn't loud. It's not fireworks and vengeance. It's silence, the kind that lingers after truth walks in the room. That night when I tucked Emily into bed, she asked Mommy, "Are we really safe now?" I smiled for real this time. "Yes, baby, we are." Outside, snow fell in soft spirals under the streetlights, quiet, steady, endless. I stood by the window, sipping tea, watching it cover the city like a clean sheet of paper. Tomorrow, I'd start writing on it again. 5 years after that night on the frozen highway, I walked into Collins Industrial again this time, not as a consultant, but as an owner. The company had been restructured and renamed under new leadership. My firm, Monroe and Reeves, held a controlling share after the audit settlement. The irony was poetic. His empire now answered to me. Laura and I had built our own consultancy from the ashes of his downfall. She handled the clients, the politics, the courtroom charm. I handled the numbers, the quiet precision, the logic of truth. Together, we were unstoppable. When the acquisition papers were signed, she looked at me and said, You're ready to face him, aren't you? I've already faced him, I replied. He just doesn't know it yet. The boardroom looked the same. Same windows, same view of the river, same sense of power humming beneath the air. But the atmosphere was different. No arrogance, no fear, just anticipation. Employees gathered around curious about the new owners. I could feel the eyes on me as I stepped inside my heels clicking on the marble floor. I wore a black tailored suit and a small pearl pendant, simple, sharp, deliberate. Michael was already seated at the far end of the table. His lawyer sat beside him, gray suit, stiff posture. Michael looked older, paler. He still carried that air of entitlement, but it had cracks, now thin lines where pride had begun to rot. He didn't recognize me at first. Not really. The name on the document said Claire Monroe, not Collins. The hair was shorter now, the voice lower, measured. He stood halfway up when I entered, trying to regain control. You must be Ms. Monroe. I appreciate your time. I smiled calm. You already have more of it than you deserve. For the first time, he blinked, confused, then unsettled. Recognition began to flicker behind his eyes. Wait. You. Laura stepped forward, smoothly breaking the moment. Mr. Collins, let's keep this professional. We're here to discuss the transition plan. He sat down slowly, eyes still locked on me. It's you, he whispered. It's really you. I took my seat at the head of the table. Let's begin. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Numbers, contracts, liabilities, every word was factual, clinical, undeniable. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. Halfway through, his lawyer kept glancing at me, whispering to Michael like he was trying to keep him from saying something foolish. But Michael couldn't help himself. Guilt has a way of breaking composure. At one point, he leaned forward. Why didn't you just move on? You could have had a life, a new start. I met his eyes. I did. He swallowed hard. This, he gestured around the table. This isn't justice. It's obsession. No, I said. Justice is math. This is balance. Silence filled the room. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. When the meeting ended, Laura gathered the papers while I walked to the window. The river below was half frozen, glittering under the afternoon sun. For a second, it looked like that snowy road again, cold, endless, indifferent. Michael stood behind me. You could have told me, he said quietly. Told you what? That you were alive, that you... I turned to face him. Why? So you could leave me again? Or apologize so you'd feel lighter? He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left for him to say. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You always believe some people don't get consequences. You were wrong. He looked away, his reflection trembling in the window. You've become cruel. No, I said. I've become complete. We left the conference room in silence. The new board members congratulated me. Cameras flashed. Someone from PR asked for a quote for the press release. I simply said, we believe in transparency. Later that evening, as the office emptied, I walked through the corridors alone. The sound of my heels echoed against the glass walls, just like it had the night he first brought me here years ago, back when I was the silent wife at a company party smiling on cue. Now the smiles were mine to command. In the elevator, I caught my reflection, composed, calm, unrecognizable, from the girl who'd once begged on a snowy road. The past and present overlapped for a moment, then settled quietly into place. Downstairs, Laura was waiting by the lobby doors. She handed me a file. Final sign-off. He's officially out. I took the pen and signed. The ink glided across the page like ice melting. When I handed the folder back, she said softly, You did it. No, I corrected. We did it. She smiled faintly. And what now? I looked up at the glass facade of the building, where my reflection shimmered beside hers. Now we build something that lasts. The next day, the news hit every major outlet. Monroe and Reeves acquires Collins Industrial. CEO steps down amid scandal. The photo beneath the headline showed me walking beside Laura, both of us poised and silent, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Michael wasn't in the picture. He never would be again. That night I went home early. Emily was in the kitchen trying to bake cookies from a recipe she'd found online. Flour everywhere, laughter spilling into the air. She turned when I walked in, eyes bright. Mom, you're home. I smiled, kneeling to hug her. I told you we'd make it, didn't I? She nodded. You always do. Later, after she fell asleep, I stepped out to the balcony. The city stretched beneath me, lights twinkling through the haze. Snow started to fall again, slow and soundless. I thought about all the nights I'd spent wondering if revenge was worth it. It was, but not because it hurt him. Because it healed me. It proved I wasn't a victim of that night anymore. I was the author of what came after. As the snow thickened, I whispered into the cold air, "We're fine now." For the first time in years, I believed it. It was snowing again the morning I decided to go back. 5 years to the day. The storm wasn't as brutal as the one that nearly ended me, just soft flakes drifting through the gray sky. The kind of snow that whispers instead of screams. Emily sat in the passenger seat, humming along to a Christmas song on the radio. She was 8 now, tall, confident with my eyes, and a laugh that reminded me of sunlight breaking through clouds. She didn't remember that night, of course. She only knew that once, long ago, her mother had to fight hard for both of them to survive. I'd told her the truth in fragments enough for her to understand that strength isn't born, it's rebuilt. "Where are we going, Mom?" she asked. "Somewhere I used to know," I said softly. The drive was quiet. The road wound through the same frozen stretch of highway I'd walked 5 years earlier. Time hadn't changed it much, the same cracked asphalt, the same skeletal trees bending under snow. When I reached the spot, I knew instantly. The landscape was branded into me. I parked on the shoulder, cut the engine, and let the silence settle. Emily looked out the window. "It's cold," she said. "It was colder that night," I murmured. She frowned, curious. "Is this where—" "Yes." I stepped out of the car boot, sinking into snow. The wind nipped at my face, but I didn't shiver. Not this time. I walked toward the ditch where I'd fallen, where a stranger had found me half buried. The same world, but a different woman. Emily followed, clutching a small white flower she'd brought from home. "You said we were going to say goodbye." I nodded. "We are." We stood together, the snow falling around us like ash. She placed the flower down gently on the frozen ground. "Goodbye to what?" she asked. "To fear," I said, "and to who I used to be." I closed my eyes. The memories came fast. The sound of the car door slamming, the red taillights vanishing into the dark, the silence afterward. I let them play once more, not as nightmares, but as old film reels fading to black. When I opened my eyes again, the road was empty, peaceful. Some ghosts don't haunt you forever. Some just wait for you to return so they can let go. That afternoon, we stopped for hot chocolate at a diner near the highway exit. The waitress smiled when she saw us, a mother and daughter dusted in snow cheeks pink from the cold. Emily pressed her hands to the warm cup and said, "I like it here." I smiled. Me too. There was something beautiful about ordinary peace, something I hadn't felt in years. No more courtrooms, no more headlines, no more revenge to chase. Just quiet. As we drove home, she fell asleep, her head resting against the window, snow drifting past like confetti. That evening, Laura came over for dinner. She brought a bottle of wine and her usual dry humor. "You look lighter," she said, setting down her coat. "I left some weight behind," I replied. She chuckled. "That road again?" I nodded. I needed to see it one last time. She poured 2 glasses, then raised hers. "To survival?" I clinked mine against hers. "To justice." She smiled, eyes soft. "You know, when we met, I thought you were going to break." "I did," I said. "That's how I learned how to rebuild." After she left, I stood on the balcony, city lights glowing beneath the falling snow. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. The world kept moving, messy, flawed, real. I thought about Michael for the first time in months. Last I heard, he'd moved out of state after the settlement. His assets were gone, his name blacklisted in every major firm. But I didn't hate him anymore. Hate is heavy, and I'd carried it long enough. Forgiveness, I'd realized, isn't for them. It's for you. It's the final act of taking your life back. So I whispered into the night, "I forgive you." Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Inside, Emily stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about snow angels. I tucked her blanket tighter and kissed her forehead. On her nightstand sat the photo she'd insisted on framing me and her at my new office, smiling beside the company sign that read, "Monroe and Reeves." I looked at it for a long time. Every decision, every scar, every cold night had led here to this warmth. And for the first time, I understood what survival really means. It's not just getting out alive. It's walking back into the snow and realizing you're not cold anymore. As I turned off the lights, I thought about all the women who'd written to me since the story went public: letters, emails, messages from strangers. They said things like, "Your story saved me. I thought I was alone. I'm finally leaving him." It reminded me why I'd spoken up, why I'd turned pain into purpose. Revenge had been my spark, but truth became my legacy. So I made a quiet promise to myself I'd keep telling stories like mine for every woman who never got to. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the city in silence. The same snow that once tried to bury me now felt like protection, not punishment. I stood there for a while, watching it cover everything in white, clean, forgiving, endless. And I said the words I'd wanted to say for years. That night, I thought I lost everything. Turns out I was just being reborn. If you're still here listening, thank you. Maybe you've been through your own storm. Maybe you're still standing in the snow, wondering if it will ever stop. It will. You just have to keep walking. And when you do, when you finally step out of the cold, tell your story.